All right, thank you. And I will start to share my screen. Great. And can everyone see that okay? Excellent. So first, I just want to thank everybody and all involved with the PWSA for helping legitimize the study of pro wrestling and really allowing spaces like this to prompt quality discussions on the topic. You know, for me, I wear a lot of hats. I'm faculty at Fielding Graduate University and teaching courses in media psychology, community and self-representation in the digital space, lectured in screenwriting at San Diego State, done a lot of fan study stuff at USC. So if you couple all of that scholarly stuff with about a decade of applied experience in entertainment and including my current involvement actually with an LA-based indie wrestling company called Maverick Wrestling, shout out. But ultimately, I'm very passionate about where sports, culture, and conversation collide and all the touch points that deal with that. So when I started my PhD, there was only one industry that I wanted to really deep dive into, and that being sports. So while being a fan isn't a new concept, what has changed, however, are the ways in which fans identify with and experience sport. And that's largely in part because of the integration of technology. All these media converging digital water coolers where fans can meet in real time and rap about what's going on. And you would be willfully ignorant to have that conversation without talking about how pro wrestling has helped set the tone for those new normals of the industry standard. So what I'm going to do is briefly walk you guys through what is not just the what's, right, of content and the structure of, but also try and highlight the why, the stuff behind the scenes emotionally that's rooted in fandom, psychology, and consumer insight, and really harp on how this is personified with the athletic artistry of wrestling. And then you get a recipe for something that's really emotionally sustainable. So in the digital age, there needs to be a discipline beyond communication that stays current to the latest innovations and society of my doctorate. And what this really gets into is how technology and the human experience converge. It looks at interpreting the human experience in relation to our usage and meaning that we attach to media and all these devices that we have now. So now when you apply this to sport and pro wrestling specifically, this is a really important backdrop because as people evolve in terms of the requirements that we have for content and engagement, then the industry itself has to evolve alongside it as a response to stay relevant. So to briefly give you a top-down look at how sport media consumption has changed, this is a timeline I threw together to show how far we've kind of come along, because you got to know where you come from kind of stuff. So when tracing the activity in sports media, you can see a pattern in human activity of wanting to be more fully engaged with the game or the live event. Start with newspapers starting in the 1870s to 1911 when a college football game was mechanically reproduced via Western Union telegrams. This was really funny because there was over 1,000 people sitting in a room. And it really starts to show how values of group membership and belonging started because people wanted to be with each other to watch sports. Now you fast forward all the way into 2014 actually with the WWE launching their network as a direct-to-consumer OTT platform. Then going a little bit further into 2018, the partnership they have with NextVR to bring fans closer to the action with immersive technology. And what's the next trending wave going to look like for wrestling? And this is obviously going to be really interesting given the crisis that we have going on right now. So there's a lot left to be determined. Now, pre-pandemic, let's start to look at some of those what's, the front-facing, window-dressing content models that wrestling has been basically the quarterback for within all of sports. Now, social listening is this fancy concept that marketing executives use to describe the process for receiving customer feedback. Thousands and thousands of dollars are spent on tools for audience analytics and social media measurements. All of that stuff is fine. But pro wrestling in its core has been listening to their consumers for more than like half a century. Social listening is not new. Audience engagement isn't an algorithm. It's a passionate fan giving you real-time feedback on whether or not they're buying what you're putting down. And you get to have some fun with it at the same time. So having listened to the audience, we know if content is king, then marketing is queen. What's good about all of this material is, what good is it if it's not packaged or distributed properly to consumers, right? So that's where this head and shoulder programming model comes into play. Now, the head is the actual live event. That's the game itself, right? And everything beneath it is considered shoulder programming, which works to support the event with that old bait and switch or bait and hook idea of getting fans and potentially new fans interested. So this is the pregame, the postgame, the backstage stories. All of this is, most of the fan favorite stuff. Arguably, this could be considered betting now, esports potentially. Even the individual superstars producing their own content, like up, up, down, down, social media. All of this stuff contains a lot of fan favorite stuff, and all of it is produced to complement the main draw in the overall sport experience. Now, all of that are the what's, right? And each one of those can honestly be broken down piece by piece, organization by organization, if you want to. So what I want to turn my attention to now is the why, that stuff on the back end that I was talking about, because honestly, I'm a fan psych and consumer insight nerd, and this is what happens. So there's little room for simple spectatorship in pro wrestling, because as it is, it's embedded largely as a generational passed down treasure that is the potential to grow exponentially. Old research on fan identification looked to measure a person's allegiance to a team or player, looking at those shared attributes between the two. And typically in the past, this tends to be only scaled as one aspect of psychological connection. And I at least believe, and I think a lot of you will share the sentiment with me, that there's a lot more to that. And so for my dissertation process, I looked to answer that call and look at fandom as a multidimensional experience. And there are varied levels of identification. And because of that, sports media of evolution that we looked at earlier, identifying with wrestling or a specific superstar, it's highly stimulated now by social media consumption. The wrestling experience is ultimately centered and serviced in both traditional and digital settings. Now, within this concept of fan identification, there are three main components of commitment. This is all coming from organizational psychology. The first is affective attachment, and I call this the want factor because it's emotionally based. So this is something as simple as, I want to watch AEW Dynamite, or I want to get to the show early because I want to see everybody arrive. The second is continuance, which means that a person will consistently act in a certain way because of the perceived emotional cost of not keeping up with that behavior. So I call this the need factor. Like, I need to watch the game, or I need that new Release the Hounds Jericho shirt because I'm damn sure that's going to come out pretty soon. And in psychology, this is considered FOMO, that fear of missing out, or the fear of not being perceived as a hardcore fan, or being a part of that shared collective experience of chanting together. So the last component is normative, which I call the should factor. And this refers to the obligation a person has to the art, the superstar, and the meaning that's embedded behind certain symbols that represent something greater. So this would be like, I should buy that New Day or Kofi t-shirt to support my guy and all the cultural persistence that he represents. This is rooted in personal responsibility, and it paints fans as an external stakeholder who is emotionally tied to the space. So with those three pillars, what I like to do is break down, how does this all work, right? The why. What does a fan need to do? How do they need to behave in order to illustrate their commitment? And this is under the concept of identity utility, which is a set of supporting behaviors that, when done, uphold one's affiliation and brand loyalty. So I've categorized each of these behavior sources under the different levels of commitment we just talked about. So, and this potentially could be presented also as a publication topic in the future to get deeper into how behaviors might contrast for different regions and demographics, for example. So, but from a general scope, under affective, you see that there is customer recruitment and stronger loyalty. Recruitment, that being when a fan positively engages with others about the organization that they like, trying to persuade them to be fans and get emotionally invested. And loyalty is pretty self-explanatory, and it's about maintaining a sense of faithfulness. Then under continuance, you got product utilization and resilience to negative information. Now, we know in social media age, there's a lot of trolls and such going on. So this is in regards to ignoring or downplaying any negative information that's going on. And, with product utilization, we see obviously a lot of second and third screens and participatory culture that adds our own thumbprint to the space. And, getting back to the negative information stuff, we're kind of like hunters and gatherers. We sort through the information, sift through all the bullshit, and then we gather only what we deem to be necessary. And lastly, under normative, we see company promotion and a willingness to invest. If you study brand psychology and any level of consumerism, there's this thing called the possession self-link, which basically describes how consumer identities are built from the possessions owned and the content consumed. So these tokens are treasured portals to something emotionally significant. And the willingness to invest, this speaks about the process that fans go through to actually spend their money with what we know drives this business, and where fans subconsciously make internal and external and financial investments as well for their favorite superstars and organizations. Now, for anybody that likes numbers, I can give you links to my dissertation research and much more in-depth statistics about the study, but to very quickly highlight the methodology and results, I conducted a mixed method quantitative study to measure the impact social media participation has on identity, and if it actually does nurture the connection. Results? Yes, it does. And it does so differently for each level of affiliation and those forms of commitment. So this is a screenshot example of the survey, which was broken down by each of those commitments. So in this series, you'll see the question asks, or statement rather, I am loyal to my favorite team or player and use social media to promote my allegiance, which over 30% agreed upon, and another 40 agreed or somewhat agreed. So again, let me know if you want this. And lastly, as means to highlight marketing strategy and tie all of this what and why together, I coined an approach for wrestling fan management as the 3 E's. This is emotion, engagement, and experience. It's not about storytelling anymore. It's about story living. And the experience is far greater than the game or event itself. And everything can become very valuable assets. So with that, I want to say thank you. That is all I've got. And I always just like to end these type of talks by saying that never stop being a fan, because you just might mess around and change the game, because all of this is very, very significant. So thank you.
Hey, Tunisha, I'm just going to pop in here with some things that have been coming up in chat.
Cool.
One thing we were talking about is this idea of like shoulder programming versus paratext versus metatext. And we were curious to hear more about how you think fans are engaging with these different parts, and how maybe like WWE in particular and AEW are using them as different ways to engage with their fans.
Yeah, it's huge. And I think the shoulder programming part is something that's really taking on a stronger emphasis. And in the past, we saw back on that timeline, there was, you can start to see that I got to get a little bit more invested in engagement and shoulder programming where, okay, so now you've got radio in 1921, and then we got TV with the Summer Olympics in 36. And then you've got ESPN going 24/7 in the late 70s, like early 80s. Like, it's getting more and more engaging because now there's more and more room for content, and fans are demanding much more and more and more. So I think AEW is much more, or at least has the insight and at least acknowledges that, and that fans have a relevant means to add to that by producing extra shoulder content. And I think they're using platforms now like social media, obviously, to help encourage fans to participate. I wouldn't be surprised if they did something like the NBA is doing, where they have like NBA Twitter, where now they're actually having like tangential content going on while the live game is going on. AEW, and I probably will see that happen because AEW is on TNT, just like the NBA always has NBA on TNT with Shaq and all of them. And so they had a thing where they let fans vote during the first half of games who they wanted an ISO camera on during the second half, so they could watch that on the second screen. So then if you voted on Steph Curry, for example, and if that won on Twitter, then on Twitter you can actually participate in a chat, and there would be an isolated camera only on him. And that's obviously going to be a second and third screen to complement the actual live game going on. So all of that is kind of this blend of shoulder and head programming that, given AEW and Turner, TNT, I think that's something that they might be able to do, but it definitely does coexist in this shoulder space,
How much do you think that shoulder space in professional wrestling is being controlled creatively by the wrestlers, and how much is being controlled by the higher ups, the promotion?
Mm. If they give them the freedom, the keys to that, I was actually pretty damn surprised that WWE, at least thus far, hasn't tried to. Maybe they do, and maybe I'm just not privy to it, but tried to get their pots and hands in, what um, into the up, up, down, down, and what Austin Creed or Xavier Woods is doing with the video game stuff and having all the superstars being interviewed at the same time. I hope and pray that there's at least going to be a continued free leash to go on and do whatever you want, so long as it's not, against the brand and stays family friendly. But I definitely hope that athletes understand now that they are their own individual brand. And within this whole, what do you call, independent contractor stuff, that means that you can also now start producing your own individual streams of revenue that are separate from who your main employer is. And right now, especially, I know a lot of other professional athletes and other sports are using this whole quarantine as an opportunity to take advantage of that. Get educated on brand psychology. Get educated on how to market yourself. Go and use the other platforms, because what else are you going to do? Keep your mind, body, and brain active, and still realize that you can use technology now and social media and story like this to create extra added complementary content.
And that was one of the things that's coming up in the chat is, do you think that we'll see any experimentation with this tonight on WrestleMania?
This is funny because I guess I'll turn my video back on. It's funny because I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I woke up this morning and I was like, oh shit, it's WrestleMania week. Like, I already forgot, a little bit if it wasn't for this. So I hope that there will be some type of live real-time interaction with fans, because what else why not? It's just a rich opportunity but I think that this will definitely kind of lead into that they're going to be using this as almost like a test, a lens to see what can they do. Do we not trust fans enough to kind of troll or hate everything that's going on, but what tonight are they going to do? Splitting it up into 2 nights, wise. This is just oversaturated with talent and content and storylines. But I think it's about recognizing and giving fans the validation that, yes, we hear you, we understand what your needs are, and we'll at least try and give you a platform to express that. They've shown the promise to do that with launching the network, because there was a demand to want to watch content on my time, when I want and how I want on, whatever device. So I hope that they at least try and incorporate some of that within the next 48 hours.
And Ben brings up a point about how ever since Brock left in 2004, they've been afraid of letting any wrestlers get bigger than the WWE brand. And I'm wondering if this is similar to sports as well, where sometimes you have particular athletes who might be bigger than the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're seeing that now, because I can't watch, First Take or Sports Center without hearing Tom Brady. It's like he's the entire damn league, and it's like or there's a hell of a lot. So it's like certain guys will lead every A block, right? Like that first. That the opening of the show, like what's the main draw? Like what are we going to be talking about here? So every sport individually has, I think, those superstars, those marquees, the flagship of the company, those first go-to names that you think of. WWE might be more afraid of that, but contractually, I think they're probably much more comfortable trying to pump certain people because they know they've got their claws in them, so to speak. I'm curious to see how AEW and others, and even some of the independents, kind of allow for much more, not only cross promotion, New Japan, Ring of Honor, MLW's, Maverick. I mean, Killer Cross is our champion right now in Maverick, but we'll have to figure that out at our next show. But so all of these different things, it's interesting. I hope that there is much more freedom now to allow them to express themselves creatively and have their own brand personality that they own as intellectual property that they can take and, make some money off of, because it's their bodies.